Welcome to the Resume Storyteller, bringing you interviews with industry experts, regular folks who tested the job search waters and succeeded, and strategies to tell your story and land you job interviews. Here's your host, Virginia Franco.
Hey guys, I have with me today career coach and resiliency expert David Lee. He has been involved in the resilience field for over 30 years and is a 3-time career changer himself. Today he's the founder of Soul Satisfying Work. His diverse background includes work in the addiction field as a counselor, and he's passionate about physical fitness, healthy nutrition, and the application of wisdom traditions and mindfulness practices in today's complex world. He's presented at conferences and meetings throughout North America and Australia. He's the author of 100 plus articles and book chapters on performance, and he's actually my first repeat guest. So, because last time we spoke, we talked about resiliency during COVID, and with all of the layoffs going on, I couldn't think of anyone better to come in and, discuss the importance of resiliency as it relates to rebounding from a layoff. So David, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me and having me again. I appreciate it.
So what is it about a layoff that makes it a uniquely challenging event compared to maybe other stressors that we face?
Yeah, you think about how much of our identity is connected with our work and our profession. And so I think that's one of the first challenges of dealing with a layoff is I am not that, whatever that is. And doing the work to let go of that identity. I think another point, again, it relates to identity, is how not to make it mean more than it is in terms of seeing it as a business decision as opposed to a statement about our worth.
Yeah.
And especially if it's in an organization where communication isn't that great, oftentimes layoffs come out of the blue. And so just the shock to the nervous system of something totally unexpected, can really, rock a person's world in the sense of, like, I really don't have a whole lot of control or nearly as much control as I thought I did. So I think those are some of the most fundamental reasons.
Yeah, and to your point about, people take it personally. And I don't know if, 80 years ago, layoffs did happen because of performance, but ever since I've been employed, when there's a performance issue, you get on a performance plan before you get laid off, where these massive layoffs more often than not have very little to do with performance. They are strictly business decisions.
Yeah. And, as you're saying that, Virginia, it also makes me think about in terms of the sense of betrayal. And
Yeah.
I think sometimes people misunderstand or misrepresent in their mind what that employer-employee social contract is, and thinking of it whether as like one big semi-happy family or friends, etc. And so when they get laid off, it's like, hey, wait a minute, like I was doing great
we were
work.
family.
Yeah, and I cared about you.
Right.
Yeah.
No, you and I both live on LinkedIn, and it's people are devastated and angry, and they're going through all those emotions. So I'm just so happy that you are here to talk about how people can grow resilient, because many times people face layoffs more than once. It's, it's just part of being in corporate America. But, you sent me several items that we wanted to talk about, and, I sort of saw them falling into 3 different categories. So I wanted to sort of lay out the categories and then, talk about each one. So the first one was, the importance of not going at this alone. The second one are shifts that we can make to our mindset. And then the third one is how to harness the mind-body connection to strengthen our resiliency. So I guess let's just start with the top. Let's talk about not going it alone and why that's so important.
You got it. And actually, one thing I do want to say, to loop back to your mentioning the first podcast interview that we did, I really encourage people to listen to that, because really everything I talked about in that is relevant now. So,
you know what? I'll put a link to the first podcast in the show notes.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So the not going it alone, that anybody who's been laid off or has been fired knows about that feeling of like, I'm the only one that this has happened to, that kind of feeling of shame, like there's a scarlet letter on my forehead.
Yeah.
And it's like, even though we know intellectually, like that's not true, that's not how it feels. And so I think number one is to counteract that desire to kind of crawl into, our little cave or hole and nurse our wounds. So that's number one. And actually related to that, those listeners who may be Brené Brown fans and know her work on shame, this might sound familiar, that one of the things that we know about shame is that it thrives in silence.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. And so it dissipates, it dissolves in the light of day. And so the more we're
like a vampire.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Yeah. And so the more we're willing to share with, people that we can trust about, what happened, our fears, our anger, etc., the more it dissolves that feeling of shame and like there's something wrong with me and nobody else has gone through this. So recognizing that really the only or the strongest way of healing shame, and in this case, like undeserved shame, is through connection with other people and sharing. Another reason for not going it alone, if I can get a little neurobiological around that. So one of my earlier careers was in the mind-body medicine field, was also in the trauma field. And so, understanding how major shocks to the nervous system affect people and what are the practices that heal that, and understanding a bit about how the brain works, et cetera, is really helpful in terms of practical techniques. And so one of the things that we know about the human nervous system, and this comes from the amazing work of Dr. Stephen Porges, who created the polyvagal theory. And basically, the takeaway is that the human nervous system is fundamentally designed to operate best in co-regulation versus self-regulation. And so self-regulation is like, I feel really bad about being laid off. I feel embarrassed. I feel scared, et cetera. I'm going to just like talk myself out of it or pull myself up by my bootstraps.
Right.
Whereas co-regulation, it goes back to sharing with others, getting support from others. And one of the bits of evidence that Dr. Porges uses for this premise that we're hardwired for co-regulation, anybody who's a parent, especially if you still have little kids, you see that humans are hardwired for co-regulation. When your kids are little, they can't calm down. They can't self-regulate.
No, they can't. Yeah.
Yeah. So you think about when, how many kids do you have? I know you have at least one.
I have 4, but they're past that little
Yeah, they're grown up
of throwing temper tantrums. Yeah.
But you think about, let's say, when they're like babies, or let's even toddlers. Let's say a baby and one of your little ones starts crying. You don't say like, come on, suck it up. Yeah, figure it out. Yeah. Grow up or whatever. You rock and do the cooing noises and do all that sort of stuff. Well, what you're doing is you're helping that baby's nervous system calm down, because the baby can't regulate itself. And even though as we get older, we develop abilities to self-regulate, again, it's much more effective to co-regulate. So at a real like basic neurobiological level, not going it alone, but sharing that burden is so important.
So just talking with others, working with others, maybe joining a job group, that is effectively co-regulating our human nervous system?
That's very much breaking the silence of shame and normalizing what's going on. In terms of that being said, those can help co-regulate. I mean more directly one-on-one.
Okay.
Where if to help somebody talk you off of the ledge, if you will, sharing whatever you're feeling or whatever perspective you have, and that other person offering support as well as offering a more rational, perhaps, perspective, because they're not in the midst of the drama.
Yeah. More like a neutral third party.
Exactly. Carry neutral party. Exactly. And one of the other things that I think oftentimes people don't think about when they're like, oh, I don't want to burden other people. I got to do this, be strong and do it on my own, is you're really giving other people a gift when you ask them for support. Because, as especially in the work that you do, Virginia, that you're helping people, it feels good to help people.
Yeah.
So
and what does that help do to our central nervous system if we're the helper?
Exactly. Perfect. You got it. So those are three simple but powerful reasons for not going it alone.
Yeah. It seems to me by speaking with other people and getting that support, you're making yourself, in addition to being resilient, you're making yourself able to speak to the layoff, where you can go into an interview confidently and say, I was laid off as part of a large organizational reduction, making it clear it has nothing to do with me and my personal performance. Yes. So you have that confidence going into that. Okay.
Actually, though, Virginia, before we move on, since you mentioned that, which is a really important point, I do want to throw out something that's, even though it's one of my points that isn't under Seek Support, it's such a powerful point or practice that relates to the point you just made. And that is the power of journaling. And maybe if you wouldn't mind putting a link to that study that I sent you, Dr. Jamie Pennebaker's work on journaling, where Jamie Pennebaker is really big in the mind-body medicine field for his work on the healing power of journaling. And one of the studies that he was part of that speaks to what you were talking about in terms of processing the layoff helps you get into an emotional state and a perspective state to be able to talk about it calmly and confidently in a job interview. So here's the study. So it was 60 some employees from a tech company that got laid off, and they divided them into 3 groups. One group wrote for 5 consecutive days for 20 minutes. They journaled about their deepest thoughts and feelings about being laid off and the job search. The second group wrote the same, 5 consecutive days, 20 minutes a day, but they just wrote about the facts. Today, like this is what happened today, this is what happened, et cetera. And then there was a third control group. And what they found was, I'll just read the takeaway. 3 months later, there was no significant difference between the non-writers and the facts-only writers in finding employment. The experimental group, so the ones who wrote about deep thoughts and feelings, the experimental group, however, was more successful in finding full-time employment. And the thing that was, and check this out. This was, as a former therapist, this surprised me. And I think it really bears stating for people about why journaling is powerful and how it relates to them presenting well in the job interview, is what Dr. Pennebaker's work found and he did all kinds of versions of experiments on journaling, was the people who made the biggest shifts and were able to let go of the trauma and move on. It wasn't the cathartic effect of the writing, which when I was a therapist is when I learned about this, that's what I thought it was. It was the writing about it and reviewing it and actually updating the writing. By externalizing it, it helped them change the way they saw what happened.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Isn't it? So you think about, for somebody who got laid off or got fired, by doing the journaling, it can shift you from like, I'm a big loser, this was a horrible thing, and maybe the feeling of anger and bitterness, to it is what it is a business decision, and it's also giving me the chance to find something better.
Right. You see the positive from it. Yeah.
Exactly.
No, that's fascinating. Well, that is a perfect segue into discussing mindset shifts. So why do you see that as so critical to the resiliency and layoff, or resiliency post layoff?
Yeah. So I would say, of all the principles and practices I've studied and implemented in 30 plus years now in resilience, getting good at challenging a negative mindset, negative self-talk, counterproductive beliefs, counterproductive stories we tell ourselves, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Getting good at that is among the most practical and powerful practices. And so I'll go through these, and just feel free to jump in if you want to riff on something or ask a follow-up. So number one, and this is, anybody who either is in a 12-step program or knows somebody has or seen bumper stickers, "This too shall pass," is repeating that mantra. Another related saying that I like to use is, keep in mind, this is just a chapter. It's not the whole story.
Yeah, it's a blip.
Yeah. It's like, think about movies you've watched or novels you've read where the protagonist is having all these horrible things happen. And like, that's just part of the movie. That's part of the story. It's not the ending.
No, that's a really good point. So do you recommend people literally chant mantras in their head? This is a blip. This too shall pass.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Because they're so short and pithy and undeniable. I also, another one that I like to remind myself of is that everything can change in an instant. And there's a fun story related to hypnosis behind it, but I won't go into it. But it's that's another useful one. I'll just give you go ahead.
Yeah. So how does saying everything will happen in an instant help with mindset shift?
Well, no, everything can change in an instant.
Oh,
Actually,
okay.
yeah, yeah. I'll tell you. I'll give you a brief version of the
Okay.
story. So when my daughter was little and just started to learn to walk, she one of the first things she did was grab a key out of this glass bookshelf of mine, glassed-in bookshelf that I had a lot of my professional books, including those that I oftentimes refresh. And my wife at the time and I couldn't find the key. And as the months went on, it's like those books were taunting me. And I'm like, and a conference is coming up and I need to review some things and I can't get to them. And I'm feeling more and more frustrated. I'm being too cheap to hire a locksmith. Like, we've got to find this. I ended up, so when I learned hypnosis, my wife at the time asked me to hypnotize her so she wouldn't feel pain when she went to the dentist. That worked well. We also used hypnosis for her to find some files she misfiled. So I figured, let's see if it'll help. Yeah, let's see if it'll help with the key, even though she didn't lose it. Well, sure enough, in a hypnotic trance, she looks in a place we hadn't thought of, finds the key. And then as I open up the the bookcase, I'm thinking, isn't this like life? Like, month after month, I felt so frustrated. This thing that I wanted wasn't available to me. And I'm, wailing and gnashing of teeth. And then in an instant, all that hassle, all that angst is gone. I have the key. I open it up. I have access to what I want. And it's like, how many things in life that we're full of angst about, and it's like, will this ever end? And then suddenly it does, like a traffic jam. It feels like forever, and then it's over, and it's like, okay, let's move on. So
go ahead.
Period. I'll leave it.
Okay. So you have given sort of 3 really powerful phrases to help you to repeat, to help you get your mind in the right place. This too shall pass. Everything can change in an instant. The other one I remember you saying is, if I can handle this, I can handle this. Is that, what is that? I feel like someone told me that's called a reminder bridge.
I haven't heard that. I think of if I can handle that, I can handle this experiences. There also, I've found it's a great coaching others who feel disempowered tool. And so to think about really hard times that you've had in the past and remind yourself, like, hey, if I could handle that, I can handle this.
Yeah.
So that,
and that's a way of helping you to get perspective on what you're facing currently, right?
Exactly. And you think about it because it's coming from your experience. It's not somebody else, like me saying it, or a slogan or a mantra, even though they're helpful. Sometimes if somebody's in a really negative state, they're like, oh yeah, whatever,
right.
Like easier said than done. It's like, okay, fine. Don't have to use that. Think about your own experiences. You have proof in your own life that you've handled really tough stuff, and you've had situations that happened that at the time seemed like they were a disaster, and now you see that they were a real gift. You've got proof in your own life.
Right. Yeah. No, I love that. Okay. I want to dive into the mind body connection because I feel like that's so not understood. And I don't know that many people have talked about it with regards to dealing with the trauma of losing your job. So tell me your top 3 techniques, or in the interest of time, because I'm sure you've got many.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to quickly put this in context, so back when I was actively involved in the mind-body medicine field, one of the things that really hit me was when people would talk about the mind-body connection. So often they talked about how the mind affects the body. So, our self-talk, what I referenced before, or the stories we tell ourselves about a situation. So, if I'm laid off, if I tell myself the story, that means I'm defective, or I'm a loser, or I'll never find a decent job again. If I tell myself those stories, it'll have a profound effect on my emotional / physiological state, which then affects how I think and how I show up in interactions. So typically when people think about the mind-body connection, it's like, oh, how do my thoughts affect my body? What people don't pay nearly enough attention to is how what's going on in the body affects the mind. And so that's a super power.
It's a flip on that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a super powerful lever, if you will, to shift how we see our situation and how we act. So let me give you a quick example of that I think everybody can relate to. And when I'm like doing classes on resilience, I always use this example because it's so classic. I was slogging through an airport. This has happened many times, but this was when it first hit me many years ago. And it was at the end of a long business trip. I was really tired, just worn out. And I'm thinking of all the things that I have to do, my to-do list, and I'm just trudging along. And then what to my wondering eyes did appear, but a Starbucks off to the side. So I tootle on over there. And this is back in the day when I would drink the venti iced drinks that have 4 shots of espresso in them.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. So you would be shaking. I would be shaking.
Yeah. Today I would definitely be that way. So I down it, and within a minute or two, I go from I've got this to do, I've got that to do, and everything's so overwhelming, to think about how you are when you're jacked up on caffeine.
Yeah.
It's my to-do list, yeah, no problem. I'll just bang it out. Oh, this issue, not a problem. I'll figure it out. And everything, I've got it handled. No biggie. And later I was thinking about, isn't this interesting? What changed here? Now, obviously, all the things that I had to do hadn't changed. And obviously, the problems I needed to solve hadn't changed. That's obvious. The interesting part was I didn't engage in positive self-talk, which is a tremendously powerful technique. So I'm not diminishing that. It needs to be in everybody's toolkit. All I did was change my physiology, and my perception of the world radically changed.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this is an advertisement for Starbucks.
I'm glad you said that, because I try to remember to say, now the takeaway isn't get jacked up on caffeine. It's get good at both capturing positive, and I say physiological / emotional states because you don't have one without the other. Any emotional state has its signature physiology, and every physiology is connected with some kind of emotion. So that's why I combine them too.
Okay.
So number one, recognize positive emotional states and capture and deploy them. I'll give you 2 quick examples. A couple of days ago, when I was going over what are the points that I want to talk about in the interview with Virginia, and I can really obsess about what's going to be the most useful and all that. So that's kind of where I was at. Well, I was doing a HIIT workout, so high intensity interval training work. Yeah, okay. I was doing that, which definitely changes my physiology, and watching. I think it was a People Are Awesome video on YouTube as I'm doing so I'm doing a double whammy. And I'm just feeling pumped. And I'm like, man, you're in the zone. Run to the computer and start jotting down these ideas. So I captured that state and did something with it. Number one.
Oh,
Number two.
okay.
Actually, do you want to say anything about that?
No, I'm just thinking this is great. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. And actually, I will give you another example of that. And then I'll give you an example of intentionally shifting state. So another example of just noticing when you're pumped up. I was working with a coaching client, and there was a bunch of things that he knew he needed to do, but he wasn't he wasn't feeling it. He for weeks he hadn't been doing these things that he needed to do. So what I suggested to him was make a list of what those things are you need to do, but agree that you don't have to execute on any of those. You're just making the list. You're not holding yourself accountable to do anything. Just make the list. And then the next time you feel like really energized, you're a happy camper, just look at your list.
Tackle your list. Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's so fascinating. So, because I'm ADD and I find that exercise helps to clear my brain. So I will sometimes say things are a little harder for me to do for immediately after I've worked out, because my brain is clear and I can focus in a way that I can't later on during the day.
Amen. I have ADD too, and totally exercise really is a must for me too, to focus. Man, I hear you on that.
Also, brown noise. The brown noise app has worked wonders. I don't know if you've tried that.
Oh no! Oh, cool.
Yeah, brown noise, not blue noise, not white noise. There's something. It's written up in the New York Times. It's really been a lifesaver for me as well.
Cool.
Okay, so recognize positive emotional state, capture it, and deploy it. I love that.
You got it.
What else?
So that's number one. Number two is develop your ability to intentionally shift your physiological / emotional state so you can deploy it on, as needed, on request. And so
to intentionally shift your physical and your mental state, or just the physical?
Shifting, in this case, we're focusing on shifting the body to change the mind. So it's shifting your emotional / physiological state.
Okay.
You got it. And so
how do you do that?
Okay. So number one is what we just talked about is exercise. That's and actually before coming on to our interview, I did some jumping up and down on one of those rebounders.
Okay.
And actually, let me I'll say a few things related. We'll get really practical. One of the things, and I did a LinkedIn post on this and a meme on this back in the earlier part of the pandemic when everybody was doing Zoom interviews about what to do so you bring your most energized and engaging self on a Zoom call. And I had this list, and these are all practices for shifting your emotional / physiological state. So it could be do some exercise, and it could just be like do a bunch of jumping jacks. It
doesn't have to be an hour workout. It could be 30 seconds of jumping jacks, right?
Exactly. Back-to-back boot camps, and then like, okay, now
yeah.
Like a quick walk around the block. We talked about before we started recording the wonders of cold showers,
right? Yeah.
Jumping in the ocean. That'll get your heart pumping. Doing some rapid deep breathing, not shallow breathing, but rapid deep breathing is one of the fastest ways of shifting your physiology. Talking with a friend that is really fun before you go on the interview, so you're not low key and kind
something. How about like injecting humor, like, I don't know, reading something funny, or
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. You got it. And thank you for saying that, because that's one of the lists is watching funny or inspiring videos. You got it. So
head over to TikTok, possibly.
Again, go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example this morning of intentionally shifting my state. So as I had emailed you, or actually through LinkedIn last night, I've been having trouble with my
Outlook.
email, with Outlook.
Mm-hmm.
And the joyousness of it continued this morning, and some other tech problems. And I'm like, I was hoping to do a little more preparation for Virginia's interview. And I also had a 10 o'clock interview that I was interviewing somebody else about their career journey. And because my first thought was, I need to postpone my 10 o'clock because I don't want to be frantically fighting with my computer and getting into an annoyed state, before,
Yeah.
and I also want to spend my time preparing. But here's where I changed my plan. My interview was with a lady named Ashley Sharettes, who is one of the most engaging, fun people to talk with. And I thought, oh, wait a minute. Let's keep that interview, because I know I'll be so pumped.
Okay.
From our conversation, I'll be able to be my best self in my interview with Virginia. And sure enough, we had an amazing interview.
Oh,
She's just
that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we've got recognize positive emotional state to capture and deploy it, develop an ability to intentionally shift your physiological state to change your mental state. What else?
Yeah. Let me look at okay. Yeah. Here's another one that I don't think gets talked about enough. And it's how to shift your identity. One of the reoccurring themes in the world of psychology and in the world of peak performance is the central role identity plays in what we're willing to try and how we show up in the world. And I'm just going to make a note. My ADD just kicked in, and there's something I want to go back to. Actually, let me I want to go back to something about changing state, because it so relates to people being laid off. And then I'll talk about identity.
Okay.
So back to my story about chugging down the 4 shots of espresso at Starbucks. One of the messages that I've heard over and over from people in the personal development field that I have such huge respect for is the role that state plays in our ability to see opportunity. And there's a gentleman named David Nagel who just has some great stuff on this. And he talks about, I don't know, Virginia, do you remember Napoleon Hill?
Mm-mm.
Okay. He wrote a book early part of the last century called Think and Grow Rich. That's like one of the all-time bestsellers in the business world, because he interviewed people who at the time were like the most accomplished people, like Thomas Edison, Alexander Graham Bell, Henry Ford, et cetera. And so David Nagel was talking about, and so like, what were the practices and what were their mindset? And one of the things that David Nagel said that I loved was one of the universal practices that Napoleon Hill found that these people engaged in, or mindsets, I'll say mindsets, that made them different from other people, is they recognize their greatest opportunities always came disguised as big problems. And so when they faced a problem like getting laid off, getting fired, instead of focusing on the crisis and the problem, they had tuned their brains to be on the lookout for the opportunity. Whereas the typical person, understandably, gets fixated on the problem. And so
it's, they look at it as an opportunity to solve a problem versus.
So an opportunity to solve a problem, or looking at it as, so that's a major one. In this time of chaos, what is an opportunity that maybe wasn't there before?
Yeah.
Or it could be like, how can I make the best out of it? Now, back to our body affects our mind. If we're caught up in fear, or like fear and loathing, caught up in fear and shame, we literally, our brains cannot see opportunities because all they see is the catastrophe, the problem. And so so two things. That's another reason why, number one, shifting our physiology, our emotional states, like watching inspiring video, listen to somebody.
So sort of removes our blinders.
Exactly.
Okay.
So number one, and that's also why the if I can handle that, I can handle this. Those experiences also give us proof that in times of crises and seeming catastrophe, doors have opened and gifts have been, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so, that whole door window thing, whatever.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And I tell you, even like when I go through hard times, even as I'm honest with myself, like, you know what, this sucks. You know, just for the record, I'm not happy about this. I'm also knowing and looking for the opportunity because I've been working with this principle for so long.
Okay.
So I'm sorry.
So let's shift, only because I'm trying to be mindful of time. Let's talk really briefly about the shift in identity and what that looks like.
Yes. Okay. So, identity, huge, influence on how we show up in networking, in interviews, whether we reach out to people or not, and whether we're willing to apply for a job that's maybe a bit of a stretch.
Right.
Okay. So, three practical techniques for shifting identity. One is, this is so cool because I'm working on a handout. By the time the podcast is out, it'll be ready, and
cool.
I'll give you a link. Yeah, on like a million more how-tos. And one that I put was make a list of the results classic ones that you know about, the results you've delivered, the accomplishments you've achieved, and the value you've provided. Not only, as I know you know better than most, does that provide useful material for your resume, it also reminds you, like, man, I've done good stuff. Like, hold on.
People tell me that all the time. That the luxury of speaking with someone about their full career story gives them a picture of, whoa, I've done a lot. I hadn't thought about it because I've been fixated on what's happened in the last 3 months.
You got it. Got it. So
to make that list, reflect back. What did things look like when I got there? What do things look like now? What was my role in getting it to that after state? What am I proud of? All those things.
You got it.
Okay.
And also to your point, Virginia, I recommend to people to do it interactively, whether it's, with somebody like us as a coach or a really wise friend, because there's this great quote by David White, the poet, who said, poetry is the act of overhearing yourself say things you did not know you knew. And working with a good coach or a good friend, and that out of that conversation, you hear yourself say stuff that you probably wouldn't have.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it helps you uncover. Yeah, absolutely.
You got it.
Okay.
Number one. Number two is the old best self exercise. Ask feedback from people. When have you seen me at my best, and why was that me at my best? And what do you see as my biggest strengths? If you're in the middle of a funk and feeling like, oh, I'm a big loser again, have other people provide more unbiased perspectives on you. So that's number two.
Okay.
And I recommend all people do that, not just people going through a hard time. And then number three, and this is, I think, a really cool kind of a pro tip, is make it a regular practice to reach out and help other people. Because you think about it, if you're laid off, if you're fired and you're feeling like I'm less than others, like those people who have jobs, and I'm just like creeping around, at networking events, feeling less than, et cetera. If you're actively like reaching out to, let's say, somebody else who got laid off, anything I can do to help you, anybody I can connect you with, what it does is, and there's all sorts of really cool research on the physiological, biochemical effect of doing acts of kindness and altruism. It shifts our biochemistry in very powerful ways. And because we can't change the body without changing the mind, it helps shift our identity from like a less than kind of person to almost like I'm a philanthropist. I'm out there doing good in the world and helping other people. And I think that's one of the most powerful, practical things.
I agree. To me, that is the most powerful way to sort of remind yourself that you are about so much more than the zeros on your paycheck and the role that you did for a company.
Yes. Absolutely. And no matter what your station is in life, there are people that you can help.
You're right. Anyone can help anyone. There's some way that you can make a difference. I love that.
You got it.
Gosh, David, thank you so much. This is talk about changing my emotional state after, reading all the headlines you can get down, but this is super empowering. These are things that we can do by ourselves, things that we can do with others, and things we can do for others. I think people are going to walk away with a lot of actionable advice.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that.
You've been listening to The Resume Storyteller with Virginia Franco. To learn more about storytelling strategies to catch the eye of today's online skim hiring and decision makers, please visit www.virginiafrancoresumes.com.